Happy New Year. New Year means new sermon series. I thought, what a great time. Let's wrap up the book of Revelation and then let's start the book of Nehemiah. And to state the obvious, my back went out yesterday, so I am not in great pain. It just looks that way. So thank you for your sympathy, the awe. Anybody else got backs that go out just, checking the mail or something, just tying a shoe, going, whoa, there you go. So if I look a little stiff, it's because I am. So let's go. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 18 says like this. They said, let's start rebuilding. And their hands were strengthened to do this good work. So may God strengthen our hands. May God strengthen our backs. May God strengthen our souls and our hearts and our minds in prayer that we would be able to do this good work. So we start a new series called This Good Work. And I think this is timely because it seems like we've been almost in a holding pattern. It seems like we want to do more. We want to have more ministry opportunities, but it seems like our hands are tied by a pandemic or restrictions or just, worry. There's just so many things where just seem like we've been stifled. And it seems the message that I've heard the most clearly from God over the last 8 months was, be still. Anybody else really, really, really bad at that part? The being still. I don't want to be still. I want to be busy because we feel like more busyness equals more activity, equals more productivity. But in the be still is when we get the clear callings of how to get to work. So I thought this would be a beautiful time to go through the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a builder. He is a worker. He is a leadership genius. But he starts with the be still. So before they can get to that good work, they start with the be still. So I want to kind of show you how I want to break down this for these next 4 weeks as we study through the book of Nehemiah. I want to start first today with a message titled, When You Can't Take It Anymore. Think about the old school Popeye cartoons. Remember Popeye back in the day before, CGI and all that? Popeye would have this moment, where usually olive oil got snatched up by Bluto, or there's just some evil villain that's doing a thing, and what's his phrase? I've had all I can stands. I can't stand no more. And then he eats his spinach, and then, game on. So this is a Popeye moment. Nehemiah's going to have one. You have one. There's something about something. You're like, that's it. I can't stand it anymore. I've had all I can stand. I can't stand no more. So that's kind of where we start today. And then next Sunday, join us. I want to really be here in person, online, do whatever you can to make sure you catch all these messages because they build on each other. If we're going to do this good work, you're like, what is this good work? I can't answer that for you yet. Some of that God needs to answer that for you specifically, and some things are for us all collectively. But to do the work, you got to make a difference. And then January 17th, that Sunday, we're going to come in here and talk about standing strong in the face of opposition. And then we'll wrap it up with shutting the door on distractions. And so I don't know about you, but my lovely wife that's watching online, oftentimes she'll come home, she works as a teacher. Some days these days I'm staying home with the boys and because they're doing homeschool, and so I'm home. Or some days I work from home while I'm writing the messages because that's a less distracted environment. And she'll come home and she'll ask me, so what'd you do today? The question is not loaded. She's not checking up on me. She's not, asking me, have you done more than be a lazy bum? But that's what I through my negative man filter, heck bent on productivity. When she simply asks, so what'd you do today? Am I alone in this, men? When someone asks, so what have you been up to? You feel the need to completely, justify your value to the world by your productivity. Even if you've done nothing all day but sit on the couch in sweatpants eating Cheetos, surfing the web or whatever, you feel the need to go, I'm busy, just busy, busy. Come on. Or think about maybe Christmas, you get together with your family. Maybe you saw that one really well accomplished uncle, and he goes, so what have you been up to? What's new? And you feel the need to kind of, talk about how busy you've been. Or take it up a notch when you go to the high school reunion And some of you skipped your high school reunion because you felt like you hadn't accomplished enough, because you want to be able to walk in there like a champ, doors bust open when you walk up into that jam going, hey, look how much I have done. Look at my awesome family. Look at what I drove in on. You feel like there's this need to satisfy society based on your accomplishments of how much you have done. So when we talk about this good work, that's not what it is. But if anyone ever had any, swag walking into his high school reunion, it would have been Nehemiah. Imagine Nehemiah going into a high school reunion going, hey, what you been up to, Nehemiah? You know those walls around Jerusalem have been down for like 150 years? Yeah, rebuilt them. How long did it take? 52 days. And Persia paid for it. Like that's something brag-worthy. But Nehemiah does not brag, but he does get to this good work. So, what I really want us to be able to do in this and recognize where we're going in Nehemiah, we got to set up some background. Like I already mentioned, some things like he's building the walls. Why? Well, Nehemiah is one of the last books chronologically in the Old Testament before we get to Jesus in the New Testament. Persian Empire is going on. King Artaxerxes is on the throne. Fascinating kind of family twist in there. He is the stepson of Esther. The book of Esther. Esther was a Jewish girl in captivity in Babylon area, Babylonian Empire that's about to be taken over by the Medo-Persians. And so when Esther becomes queen, she gets a stepson who is Artaxerxes. So maybe that's why there's some favor here to let Nehemiah go. Well, who's Nehemiah? He is the Persian cupbearer. And he's Jew. He's Jewish descent, but he's in a highly trusted, not necessarily high ranking, but a high trusted position. What's a cupbearer? Well, basically, he's the guy that's going to test all the king's wine. Before it touches the king's lips, long live the king, it's got to go through the lips of the cupbearer. If the cup's poisoned, long live the king, but short-lived your life because you were the cupbearer. But you got to be trusted to be in that position. There was also some weird stipulations. If you were going to be the cupbearer, you had to be handsome because the king doesn't want ugly folks hanging around in his court. You couldn't be like grumpy, but you also had to be well-versed in legal matters. You had to be wise and knowledgeable because you're right there next to the king. So that's where Nehemiah is. He's the cupbearer to the king. Now, also in the context of this book, Nehemiah, this is following really in Ezra and Nehemiah. In our Bibles, we have them as two separate books. In the old ancient scrolls, it'd be like one long scroll. It was Ezra and Nehemiah together. So Ezra is kind of more of the priest figure. He's gone back to Jerusalem. He's helped rebuild the temple. There are several exiled families going back to Jerusalem. But like the city walls are just still down. The city gates have been burned. There's no protection. There's really no hope against anyone that would want to invade them and to take them over again. So that's where we're at. And this all happens about 400 years before Jesus. That's some of the Nehemiah background. Now let's put this into our current context, kind of where we're at today. Now, I know you came to church, you're going, I hope we don't talk about COVID. I just want this hour at church to be like nothing news, nothing pandemic related, just, things are different. We're going to wear a mask and have our distancing and wash our hands and all things. But I hope it doesn't talk about COVID today. I'm sorry. But under our current context, we got out of 2020. Wrung out that old year because it wrung us out. We rung in a new year. Happy New Year 2021. But COVID's still here, right? That's still something that we're going to deal with. Schools will be back open again soon. Some of the cases are spiking. Some people are getting the vaccines. But in our current context, there's still a worldwide pandemic. So we find ourselves in the midst of that. And so in the midst of that, church attendance is still down. Most churches across America are seeing 40% or less of their pre-COVID attendance. So if you took us back to last March and we were 100 people or so, about 40% of that would be 40 people. That's kind of where we as a church have been. And it's hard sometimes when you walk in and going, oh man, I sure miss so-and-so. And it's so good to see some familiar faces back again. And I had a friend that came for Christmas Eve, and he came around and he's looking around and he's going, wow, he knows me, he knows the church. He hadn't been here in about 4 years when I first came to be his pastor here. And so he's looking around and going, wow, I sure thought you'd be bigger by now. And he's just giving an honest kind of, he thought, we're kind of ripe for growth in a lot of ways. And pre-pandemic, we were seeing some great trajectory. So those words kind of stung, but I thought we'd be bigger by now. So it's kind of some of our current context, which feeds into the fact that many, many pastors are going through bouts of just down feelings all the way to full-blown depression. And I think I've felt some of that as well. Some of you guys, you're so astute. You can look at me in the eye and know, man, he's having a rough go at it this time. So appreciate us as a church just lifting each other up in prayer in the midst of our current context. We don't walk around defeated because we're not defeated. We're going through something, and God is bringing us through it, even if you found yourself losing a job. So part of the current context in America, unemployment rate has been way up, but over the last 6 months, unemployment has slowly been going back down. Barely, but there's hope. It's kind of where we're at. There's definitely emotional and mental health concerns, as I mentioned, for pastors, but that's just, for across the board. There's struggles of is this worth it? I didn't sign up for this. I can't go through this. I can't go through this alone. And there's just some of these emotional struggles where we find ourselves at. So I would say that we can also see these as increased opportunities to be the church. And not just go to church. This is like a whole new, just roll things out. We're starting from a blank slate in a lot of ways going, okay, so we recognize that church is not just Sunday morning attendance. If I'm going to be the church, be a disciple maker who makes other disciple makers. And there's this incredible, beautiful multiplication of telling the gospel and sharing the gospel. So there's an incredible opportunity here. I'll liken it to this analogy of, imagine 2 shoe salesmen go to an island full of natives who are just uncivilized. They've grown up on this little Caribbean island, and they go there, and 2 shoe salesmen see the fact that they don't wear shoes at all. None of them wear shoes. And they come back to America, and they report to their managing office. They go, one salesman goes, hey, there's no need to go to that island to sell shoes because no one wears shoes. Just leave it alone. There's no hope there. There's no hope of being a shoe salesman on a place where they don't wear shoes. The other salesman, on the other hand, he goes back going, guess what? Load up the shoes in the boats. There's a whole island full of people who don't wear shoes. You get it? So we're in a situation like that. That's a silly analogy, but we're in a place where a lot of folks go in. What's the point of talking about Jesus to any of them? They've got no hope. They have no hope. If you claim Christ as Savior, you have hope. Hope like an anchor for your soul, firm and secure. So I see in our current context in America, in the midst of pandemic, there are so many increased opportunities to be the church. Have the conversations. Talk about Jesus. He is our hope. So, in the midst of this getting busy to the work, I got to quote an old, this author, pastor, he passed away in 1963, so about right at the time this church was getting started. A.W. Tozer, he's a working man, relatively uneducated, but he self-educated, brilliant. So when he talks about work, he gets it because he gets it from like a farmer's mentality, a guy who worked in the shops. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about work. So this long quote from A.W. Tozer will be kind of the springboard of where we're going to in our talk. Ready? So he says it like this. He says, in God, there is motion, but never wasted motion. He always works towards a predetermined end. So being made in his image that we are by nature constituted so that we are justifying our existence only when we're working with a purpose in mind. Aimless activity is beneath the worth and dignity of a human being. He's not done yet. This is part of a whole sermon, but I cut it down just to this part of the quote. Activity that does not result in progress towards a goal is wasted. Yet most Christians have no clear end towards which they are striving. On the contrary, I can't read sideways when my back hurts. Let me look at that one. On the endless religious merry-go-round, they continue to waste time and energy of which God knows they never have had much and have less each hour. I botched the quote, but you still get it, right? On the endless religious merry-go-round. So when I see some of the great benefits of kind of hitting a reset button on church in a lot of ways, I think we got off the merry-go-round in some things. There's some things I can't wait till we can do again or be again. There's some things going, that was just kind of busyness for busyness' sake. We're not doing it that way anymore. And you think about your own lives then. What are some of those endless, wasted activities? Think about those for yourself. What are those things? They really don't have a goal in mind. Maybe it's just pleasure for yourselves. I'm not saying that pleasure is bad, but when there's this endless pursuit of it, feeling like there's some productivity to it, but there's really nothing in the God-given purpose of how God made us in his image. So as we move forward, let's look at Nehemiah. In this good work, we got to have some goals. And part of the goals for us in this series would be one, that we recognize who we are as our mission. We love God, we love each other, we serve with humility. Those are words we want to make sure are out right in front of us often so that we know, wait, if it doesn't love God as it doesn't love each other and it doesn't serve with humility, we don't do it. That's wasted activity. Don't get busy with the things that don't matter. So that's kind of the filter and the mission and the vision of what we see and how we do what we do. We love God, love each other. Why? Because they asked Jesus, what are the greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And I'm not done yet. The second, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so we do those things and we serve with humility because Jesus himself said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And so I'm asking you, if you'll give this first month in the year 2021, if you'll give the gift of prayer-filled attention, praying, what is that thing? What is that work that God is calling me to? Maybe it's been crystal clear since you were 12 years old and God hadn't changed that yet. So you continue doing that, continue striving in how God hardwired you with passion and equipped you with abilities, equipped you with energies to seek those opportunities and how you serve him to that good work. And at the end of this series, I really want to ask that you would renew a commitment to God's work at Northeast Baptist Church. And if God's been stirring or striving and kind of leading you in a different direction, I think there's something going on over here and I really want to plug into that church, and well, God bless you in that. Be strong in that. But I would also ask that if God is leading you to be part of the revitalization efforts in reaching this neighborhood and growing this church in strength, not strength in numbers of Sunday morning attendance, strength of disciples who make disciples, and we get to see them baptized in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So that through this month, to be asking, praying, is God giving me a recommitment to the work here at Northeast Baptist Church? Those are part of our goals for this Good Work series. Now, let's get to the work of it. So Nehemiah, remember, he's cupbearer to the king. And part of his group, some of his family has gone back to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's 1,000 miles away, literally 1,000 miles away. And so some of his family has gone to Jerusalem and they're coming back. So he's talking to one of his brothers going, hey, give me a report from Jerusalem. What's going on over there? He says, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. Well, those things were burned down with fire over 100 years ago. You mean they're still burnt down? The old town is still just surrounded by rubble? So what's his response? He says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. So if we're going to start the good work, there's three things I want to bring up. How do you begin the good work? I'd say number one, sit down to cry. I'm not much a crier. I wasn't a crier either till I had boys. Now I'm a dad. I'm like, I weep at every little commercial or goodness. You see, like the wrap up of the 2020 videos, I always looked like, what's the best of and kind of the year in review. And so much of the year in review was like watching military men and women return from service overseas and like being reunited with family. And there's that hug. Or like seeing little kids, like, toddlers and 5-year-olds and stuff who haven't been able to play together because they've been quarantined and see them running towards each other and hugging. You've seen these videos? Am I the only one that teared up? I'm like, oh my God, they're hugging. I miss hugging. Like there's just, what makes you just sit down to cry? For Nehemiah, it's the fact that the walls have been broken down. So what breaks your heart? Because this whole thing is way more than just about broken walls. It's not just about broken walls. It's us asking what breaks our heart and then prayerfully lifting up, asking God, how do I help with what breaks my heart? And asking God, maybe, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. So what breaks your heart? Is it special needs or people that have special needs? Is it the bullied? Is it the hungry? Is it the abused? Is it those that are bound by addiction or drugs, or those that find themselves like stuck in a prison of pornography? Is it homelessness? Is it those who are being trafficked? Is it those who don't know Jesus and they find themselves absolutely lost in a dark world? Or maybe your heart just absolutely breaks for the unborn and they can't speak for themselves, so you want to give voice to those who might be aborted otherwise. Is it broken marriages? Or is it churches that seem like they're on their last leg? Like that's been a church that's been faithful, but they're just like, if some things don't grow, that church just might close its doors and not make disciples anymore. Are those some of the things that break your heart? For broken marriages, that's one of the things I realized that God's done a trajectory in my heart. Started over 20 years ago when I began in ministry. I started as a youth minister. In a lot of ways, I consider myself still, I'm a youth minister. I want to do ministry so much in ways that it blesses the whole family church, but especially the next generation coming up. And I'm thinking back 20 years ago, I'm serving at Baptist Temple. Baptist Temple kind of on the south side, big old, just good church, good, healthy church for over 100 years. And my first year in youth ministry there, this kid comes to my office during the like midweek at noon. I'm going, you should be in school, but this kid, he was a huge football player, offensive lineman, big guy, comes sit in my office, and he can't talk for like the first 10 minutes because all he can do is sob. Big football lineman, shoulders heaving with sobs. And I don't even know what's wrong with him. And then his mom comes in. She was trying to give him some time to be able to talk. And when she realized he couldn't say it even, she comes in to let me know, I'm getting a divorce from his dad. And we just need somebody to be able to talk with him now because he can't even, whatever that is. He can't even. And so I remember I sit with this guy. As the first tears I ever cried in youth ministry. Like, wow, I just can't do anything but sit next to him and put my arm around his big old football shoulders, and we just wept together for a while because I'm so broken for him because now his family's broken up because, mom and dad didn't keep the wedding vows that they made before God and witnesses to each other. They both had stepped out of the marriage vows, and they're trying to piece it together, but they couldn't and they wouldn't. And so now I'm just sitting here with a teenager that's just crying. It's like, what breaks your heart? What broke my heart the first time over 20 years ago? It was when the family falls apart. And it's not his fault, but you know what he did. If I would have been better, if I would have done more chores, if I would have, you start to blame yourself for the divorce. And so I'm thinking that's like the first time 20 years ago, the first time I cried literal tears in ministry. We were able to walk through that day. After a while, we just went up to the game room because we couldn't stand to just sit. Like, let's throw darts and talk through it because that's what you do when you're a man and you can't look eye to eye. You just look at a dartboard or something. But fast forward through many more years of youth ministry, my heart will always break for, oh no, I see the weight on that teenager's shoulders and I know what that weight is. We walk through that together. My wife is working as an elementary school teacher, and she would, have that same weight seeing her students, many of them whose moms and dads were going through bitter battles and divorce. And I'm going, it just breaks my heart. So when I get back to the sit down and cry, what breaks your heart? For me, I just want to see marriage as holy matrimony. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be kept pure. And so this breaks my heart when those vows are broken. So what is it for you? So when you ask what breaks your heart, this helps you to just go ahead and sit down to cry. That's step one in beginning the good work. But we don't stay there. It's not just like we're just going to have a big pity party and just stay stuck on our own misery, stuck in that old mourning. After we sit down to cry, we'll kneel down to pray. We keep going to Nehemiah. Nehemiah says, for some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. This fascinating is he says, for some days. This will actually be a couple of months. The amount of time that he sat down to cry and he knelt down to pray is longer than the actual time it took to rebuild the walls. The 52 days, it's like miraculous that he built the walls in 52 days. He spent longer in the prayer, longer in the mourning phase, longer in the fasting. So I want to let us know that if it's big enough to cry about, it's big enough to pray about. If you find yourself in tears and in agony over something, that's something you must also bring up to God. We'll pray about it. We lift it up in prayer. We want to be a house of prayer. Here's part of Nehemiah's prayer. We see this in chapter 1, verses 5 through 6. He says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant love with those who love him. We'll stop right there for a second because he's making a remembrance of the covenant that God's brought up through the whole Old Testament. I will be your God and you will be my people. So as he's praying this out, who do you think needs to be reminded? Do you think God needs to be reminded of what the covenant is? He's God. All-knowing, all-powerful, all-present. Do you think God forgot the covenant? We might sometimes feel that way. Going, God, you promised this. God, I thought it would be better than this. God, I thought we'd be bigger by now. God, you fill in the blank with whatever your unmet expectations would be. And if we're honest, we can go, wait, if anyone moved out of the relationship, or if anyone caused distance, was it God? Immovable, awesome God, great and awesome God who keeps his covenant and love with those who love him and keeps his commandments. Is it God that moved or is it us? So if anyone needs to be reminded of the covenant, I believe it's us. Here the rest of the prayer, he says, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. So let this be our prayer. And as we lift up prayers of this good work that God is pulling us into, what if you wrote those down? I want to get better at writing my prayers out again because it's so good to go back over, past journals and look and see what was God putting on my heart when I was in college, and what about when I was, a new dad, and what about this season of life? It's good to write these out. I think way too often we just pray little vague prayers. God, thank you for the day. That's honest. I say that every day probably. I hope I'm thankful for the day. But if the prayer doesn't go much further than that, if it doesn't get much more specific than that, I think we miss out on being able to get to the specific good work. So from there, how to begin the good work? Sit down to cry, kneel down and pray, and then stand up to act. So Nehemiah has been, the cupbearer to the king. And for a few months now, he's been washing his face because you got to stay handsome in the presence of the king. He's not let his face look downcast. He's not let his sorrow show out. But now here's a moment where he's going to stand up and act because he's been praying for an opportunity. And so Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 4 through 5 says, the king said to me, what is it that you want? And then I prayed to the God of heaven. Because the king is saying, what is it that you want? Because Nehemiah was able to say, one day he was coming in and he looked down. And the king says, well, you don't look sick. Are you okay? And he says, well, I am heartbroken over my people a Jewish nation going back to Jerusalem, and the gates are all burned down. The walls are all torn down and rubble still. So from that, a prayer, this is where, it could be off with your head moment. You're not allowed to be sad in front of the king. But with prayer-filled hope in God, he takes a bold step here. I'm going to tell him. And now the king goes, well, what do you want? It's like softball. So then I prayed to the God of heaven. Those quick prayers. This is probably what, hey, let me go pray about this before I give you my answer. This is a, God, please help me, give me wisdom, breath, and, breathe in prayer, breathe out the answer. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. So there's the beginning of this good work. It begins with what breaks your heart? What brings you to tears? You sit down to cry, you kneel down to pray, but you don't stay there. We stand up to act. And we don't stand up under our own strength. We don't act according to our own selfish actions. What breaks our heart, that breaks the heart of God, if we are bold enough to ask, God, will you break my heart for what breaks yours? If you can remember back before we did the series in the book of Revelation that took about 10 weeks, right before that we did a series called Dangerous Prayers. One of the dangerous prayers was saying, God, speak to me. Another dangerous prayer was, God, make me bold. And another dangerous prayer was, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. And that's how I want us to begin this. We just spend a time in prayer. We pray right now, and we don't just pray a quick little prayer and then get distracted and worry about the day or what we're going to eat. But if we would be faithful enough to be quiet enough and say, God, truly, I'm seeing what's going on around the world, and there's some stirrings in this way, but if you would break my heart, what breaks yours? Bring me into your kingdom work by your kingdom power. So let's pray that together, and then we'll spend a little bit of time just being quiet in prayer before we sing.